Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jana Rudler. I'm the Grants and Technical Services Manager for the Preservation League of New York State. And tonight we're going to be learning about Preserve New York grants. The grants are now open for the spring round. The pre-application is available on our website. Today we're going to go over eligibility guidelines, project guidelines, application guidelines, and a couple of case studies and answer any questions that you have. So before we get started, just notice that at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box that you can click on and type your questions in at any time, and I'll take breaks from time to time to answer the questions that you have. So if you're not familiar with the Preservation League of New York State, we are the statewide nonprofit working for preservation across all 62 counties of the state. We were founded in 1974 by a group of grassroots preservationists that decided there needed to be a centralized voice for preservation in New York State. And so they chose Albany, and we have been active ever since in pursuing historic preservation across the state through a number of programs that we have. We work with local colleagues such as Preservation Association of the Southern Tier, PACNY, Arch up in the Adirondacks, Preservation Long Island, and Preservation Buffalo Niagara, and lots of groups in between to help make sure that they are empowered to bring the best preservation programs to their local communities. We work through preservation policy and advocacy to make sure that historic preservation always has a seat at the table when it comes to sustainable economic growth and community development. We bring you technical services on our website through webinars and maybe someday again through in-person programming. We have our 7 to Save program as well. That just opened this month. We're accepting nominations for endangered properties that we list on our 7 to Save list for the next 2 years, and that will bring enhanced technical services and help from the Preservation League to save those sites. We also give grants. That's what we'll be talking about today. We have preservation awards too to recognize excellent preservation projects, individuals, publications, and programs. We have our Preservation Book Club. You can check that out on our website. We meet every month to discuss a book that has relevance in the preservation community. It's a lot of fun. You don't have to have read the book in order to join us for discussions. It's really fun to listen and learn. And finally, we give scholarships through our Zabar Scholarship Program. So Preservation League grants are a partnership with the New York State Council on the Arts, with additional support from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation and the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. We have 2 grant rounds a year, Preserve New York grants in the springtime, and technical assistance grants in the fall. So a quick word about technical assistance grants to keep in mind for later. These grants are intended to support historic preservation projects that are fairly small and straightforward. These are preservation planning projects, such as building condition surveys, engineering structural analysis, accessibility studies, specialized conservation studies, and HVAC studies. So this is a grant program that tops out around $4,000, requiring a 20% match. So if you have a $5,000 project, we do require $1,000 from you as a match. Technical assistance grants are intended for buildings with an arts or cultural purpose. That is different from our Preserve New York grant program. So just keep in mind, if you want to apply for a technical assistance grant, you are required to be an arts or cultural organization to do that. You must own your building or have a long-term lease. And our grants are open to 501c3 nonprofits and municipalities. We cannot grant religious organizations, individual landowners, or state-owned properties. So I mentioned the project types that we fund through our technical assistance grants. Again, these are preservation planning studies. None of our grants currently fund capital projects or bricks and mortar money, so it's important to keep in mind. But the kinds of things that we fund, the preservation planning projects, are essential first steps when you're dealing with a historic building to be sure that each step along the process of rehabilitation and repair is following guidelines and making sure to preserve the historic nature of the building. So you'll see the eligible project types on your screen for technical assistance grants. And the Science Museum of Long Island's Norwood House, they received a technical assistance grant in 2020 for a building condition survey. Now, a building condition survey looks specifically at an issue or a specific set of issues that are affecting your building. In this case, it was their windows. So you can see they have many and varied windows in various states of repair or disrepair. They needed to know how to tackle their windows. So they got a technical assistance grant from us to have a survey of their windows done, which included a prioritized work list and cost estimates for repairing their windows. They came back to us a year later for an accessibility study, not for the outside of their building necessarily, but in order to get people into all the spaces in the interior of that building. So that will look at ways to make the interior of the Norwood House more accessible to everyone. So last year, we gave out almost $63,000 in technical assistance grants to 17 projects in 14 counties across the state. And you see the little circles on the map. We awarded from Buffalo to Long Island and pretty much everywhere in between, spanning the project types. 5 of those projects were in the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area and enjoyed support from that funding. And 3 projects on Long Island were eligible for Gardner funds. So let's talk about Preserve New York grants. So this grant round comes around every spring. We just opened this a couple weeks ago. And these projects are for preservation planning projects to proceed fairly major capital projects. So if you're thinking about major renovation of your building, or if there are a number of things that need to be done to your building, then a Preserve New York grant would be a good place to start. We have been offering Preserve New York grants since 1993 as a partnership with the New York State Council on the Arts and support from the Gardner Foundation. These grants are open to 501c3 nonprofits and municipalities that own their own building or have a long-term lease. Now, if you have a long-term lease on your building, the owner of the building also needs to be a 501c3 nonprofit or a municipality. So this is a non-negotiable aspect of our grants intended to ensure site control when we fund preservation planning projects. Preserve New York grants fund 4 specific project types, unlike TAG that funds many different project types, and they're kind of flexible. With Preserve New York, they're not so flexible. There's 4, and we'll go over those in a moment. Grant amounts max out around $14,000, but we have granted as much as $20,000 for a project and as little as $2,500 for a project. So it really depends on the scope of your project. I have a question. Let's take a quick break and answer a question. So Nancy's asking, can a project apply through a nonprofit fiscal intermediary if we do not have nonprofit status? That's an excellent question. We get that question a lot. And unfortunately, Nancy, we cannot fund to fiscal sponsors or through a fundraising arm. So I'm really sorry about that. We do operate following New York State Council on the Arts rules with regard to that. And they're very straightforward that we have to fund only the building owner or leasee, and they have to be a 501c3. Thank you for asking that question, though. It's a fairly common question that we get. Okay, so Preserve New York grants also require a 20% cash match. This is 20% of the project budget. And by project budget, I mean the budget just for what Preserve New York grant is intended to fund, which is the preservation planning project. So if you're thinking long-term about a big capital project, that's not the budget we're talking about, because that budget can be pretty great indeed. So just 20% of your project budget for Preserve New York. All right, last year, we funded 31 Preserve New York grants across the state. to the tune of $297,000 in sum. All 4 project types: building condition reports, historic structure reports, cultural landscape reports, and cultural resource surveys. And we're going to talk about each of those project types. But first, a few words about capital project planning. So it's important to keep in mind planning the overall project when you think about applying for a Preserve New York grant. So we want to know, when we look at your application and when we talk to you about your project, we're going to be looking to see that your organization is ready to tackle the project that will follow your Preserve New York grant. So the first 2 items on this list are condition assessment and preservation planning study for your building. And Preserve New York grants help you with those 2 things. Beyond that, you need to be prepared to prioritize your capital project, because as you can see with like a building that's on your screen, it has a number of needs. Where to begin? So your Preserve New York grant funded building condition report can help you figure out where to begin and how to get started. That's part of the prioritization project. But you want to be prepared also to undertake a significant amount of fundraising, because grants alone are not going to cover all the cost of your capital projects. So you want to be prepared for fundraising, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while as well, see how other organizations have handled that. Completion of plans and specs, that's one thing that is not covered by Preserve New York. So you want to be prepared to work with an architect and a contractor to make sure that those plans and specs are consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic building rehabilitations. And of course, when you get your preservation planning study funded by Preserve New York, that will be considered by your consultant. So it'll be easy moving forward for your contractor and architect to follow the recommendations in your Preserve New York report. So make sure that your organization is ready to go through this list and be prepared for each item. Oh, the building on your screen is the Historic Sattler Theater. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. They came to us in, I think 2020, got a $10,000 Preserve New York grant for a building condition report. And this is one of the few remaining historically Black-owned theaters in New York State. And we're really excited to see it being rehabilitated. They've been fundraising for quite some time. You can see on the picture the banner that they have on their building, seeking donations. So they've been working on this for a long time. They've come a long way. So we were really happy to be part of this project. All right, so a few more things to consider. Decide how the potential project is going to fit your organization's mission. So it's always a good idea to know how to articulate how the capital project, the preservation planning project for your building helps your organization further their mission. This is just a good exercise in general, so that when you're seeking funds, either from through private fundraising or through grants, that you can really nail that project to your mission and show how it strengthens your organization's ability to meet that mission. So work with your board, make sure that your staff and especially your board of trustees or board of directors is fully on board with the project. So you want to make sure that you have the support of your board, make sure that they are prepared to contribute, to give or get, to help fundraise for this project and to help oversee it as well. These projects are big, and oftentimes the people on your board, if they have the expertise to help guide the process along, that's pretty helpful. And make sure that you're prepared to hire qualified building professionals. Sometimes your board members may have suggestions. They may know people. They may have a cousin or an uncle who does some work, who would be willing to step up and help the organization. That's all well and good, but make sure these folks are qualified to work on historic buildings. You may have to turn down some well-meaning offers in order to do what's best for your building. So, and again, having a Preserve New York funded preservation planning study under your belt will help you have a guide, and you can show to people and say, look, this is what it recommends. This is what we have to do. So it helps give you some fortitude in moving forward with your project. So I mentioned that Preserve New York funds for different kinds of preservation planning projects: historic structure reports, building condition reports, cultural landscape reports, and cultural resource surveys. So let's talk about each one. A historic structure report is a comprehensive look at your building along with historic research to help you learn about the building's use history and construction history. It's useful for buildings that are interpreted to the public, so historic house museums, but lots of other buildings as well, where the history of the building is important to your organization's mission. And these are usually completed by an architect or another building professional with architectural history experience. And I want to point out that each of these project types are discussed in detail in our grant guidelines. So those grant guidelines will be made available to you. They're also on our website, and I urge you to read them very carefully because they do go into detail about each project type and a lot of other things too that you need to know to successfully apply for a Preserve New York grant. All right, so a building condition report is a lot like a historic structure report, except on a smaller scale. It does not include the historic research, so that rather costly part of the project is not part of it. It's a comprehensive look at your structure or your building, inside and out, top to bottom, to give you a sense of the building's needs and current condition, and can provide to you also a prioritized schedule for maintenance and rehabilitation. These can be tailored to meet an individual building's needs. So, for example, let's say you have a building, you want to have a building condition report done because you would like to use the spaces differently for programming. You'd like to open the building for the first time to the public, or you'd like to include maybe some archival space within the building. A building condition report can help you get a sense of not just the current condition of your building, but its ability to meet your future needs for that building and your future plans for the building. So your consultant who works on this report can help you envision a future use for the building or different uses for the spaces. If accessibility is an issue, that building condition report can include recommendations on improving the building's accessibility. So there are lots of things that can be included in a building condition report to help you prepare for later capital projects. Cultural landscape reports are a lot like a historic structure report, except they focus on the landscape rather than the building. So I'll have a couple of examples of these a little later in the slideshow, but essentially these we have funded, cemeteries, historic house museums for cultural landscape reports. So this is useful if you wish to recreate a historic landscape or learn more about the development of a landscape over time. If you're looking to interpret that landscape for the public, a cultural landscape report can be useful for all those things. And these are usually completed by a landscape architect. And finally, cultural resource surveys are one of the things that we fund through Preserve New York as well. This is an inventory of historic resources in a municipality. These usually precede a National Register nomination for a historic district within a community. Not always. Sometimes cultural resource surveys are done for other reasons. We have had, for example, a few years back, and I think it was in Rochester, we had a Preserve New York grant for a cultural resource survey of all the buildings that remained that were designed by a certain architect that they wished to remember and celebrate in that city. And so cultural resource surveys don't always lead to National Register Historic District nominations, but they often do. This helps determine the historic significance, architectural styles, patterns of settlement and industrial development in an area, can lay the groundwork for historic districts as well. So this is a little different than the other three project types, but it's a pretty popular category within Preserve New York. Now, a few words about cultural resource surveys and of what they're intended to do and what they can do. Reconnaissance level, intensive level, and then National Register nomination level are the three accepted levels of intensity of cultural resource surveys. Typically, if a community has never had one done before, they begin with a reconnaissance level survey. That can be rolled into an intensive level. So reconnaissance is just getting a general idea of the kinds of buildings that are present and the the general building dates. An intensive level survey includes research on individual buildings. And finally, the National Register District nomination can lead to a National Register District that can open the doors to financial incentives for historic preservation in a community. So a couple of important things to remember about National Register being listed on the National Register of Historic Places is that this is mainly an honorific title. There are no restrictions that come with this. Oftentimes when you approach people in a community about creating a historic district, you'll have some people start asking questions like, will my taxes go up? Will you tell me what color I'm going to be able to paint my house? What kind of restrictions is that going to come with? Well, you can tell them that National Register historic districts don't come with those kinds of restrictions. That's usually local landmarking, and that's a community's efforts to preserve the historic character of an area. It's not a bad thing, but some property owners can balk at that sometimes. So the more people know, the more they tend to accept that this is really a good thing for the whole community and for them. One of the important things to remember about National Register nomination and listings actually is that this can open the door to financial incentives for preservation to private property owners. It's one of the few financial incentives that private property owners can access in New York State. So generally grants are not available to private property owners for the most part, but historic tax credits are. So that brings us to historic tax credits. Just a few words about this is that when your community has a historic district, a National Register Historic District, that opens the door to historic tax credits for property owners. There are three different kinds. New York State has a historic homeowner tax credit of 20% for owner-occupied residential properties. And then there are two kinds of tax credits for commercial properties. There's the New York State Rehabilitation Tax Credit of 20 to 25%, and the federal tax credit for commercial properties of 20%. So you're looking at, up to 45% of your investment being returned to you in the form of tax credits. Now, what does a tax credit mean? This is a dollar for dollar reduction in the amount of income tax that you would owe. And if you find yourself in an income bracket, or if you don't owe a lot of income tax, you can do a couple of things. You can spread this out over several years and take the credit for several years until you use it up. Or it can come back to you in the form of a tax return check, just like a tax return check. So this is a really nice opportunity for property owners to save money on rehabilitating and maintaining their properties. And it's a real strong incentive for historic preservation in New York State. So if you'd like more information about historic tax credits, we occasionally do tax credit workshops here at the League. These are virtual webinars, and we do have a couple of them coming up, so keep an eye out on our website. In the meantime, you can check out the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation's website. They administer the grant in New York State. You can also see some of our previous webinars that we've done on our YouTube channel. This would be a good time to mention that you don't have to write all this down, because at the end of this presentation, I will make these slides available to everyone. I apologize for not mentioning that earlier. I always forget to mention that, but you will get these slides later, so don't worry about writing all this down. All right, so we've talked about the types of projects that you can have funded through Preserve New York. And what's exciting about Preserve New York and our technical assistance grants programs is that they often lead to bigger grants down the road. So at the end of last year, Governor Kathy Hochul announced the REDC grants, so the Regional Economic Development Council grants for projects that support community revitalization and economic growth. And out of those 488 grants, 15 of them had enjoyed previous support from the Preservation League through our grant programs or through 7 to Save and other league programs. So we thought this was really exciting because they went on to get some pretty significant grants from New York State for their projects. So I thought I'd share a few of these inspiring stories with you. So Historic Albany Foundation stewards the Van Ooststrand Radliff House, otherwise known as 48 Hudson, as it is located at 48 Hudson Avenue in Albany. This Dutch building is the oldest Dutch building in Albany, and it's only one of two remaining original Dutch buildings. And they came to us in 2017 for an EPIP loan to help stabilize this building. So an EPIP loan is an Endangered Properties Intervention Program loan. This is a program that we had going for a number of years. Right now it's on hiatus. It may come back later. But these loans were intended to swoop in and help save buildings through emergency funding. These are low interest short-term loans. So they got a $200,000 loan from us. They went on to get an Environmental Protection Fund grant that same year, which helped stabilize 48 Hudson. Now, they came back in the year 2020 for a Preserve New York grant for a historic structure report. Now, typically, you want to get a historic structure report before you embark on any major capital project. So once they had stabilized this building, they wanted to go in and start peeling back the layers. And the intention is to restore 48 Hudson so that you can tell that it's a Dutch building, so you can see from the street its distinctive design. Over the years, this building has been built onto and changed, but underneath it all, it remains this building that you see on the screen. You can see that they put a screen over what the building looks like now to show what it once looked like, and they want to peel back the layers to show that building once again. So it's a pretty major project. Not only are they restoring this building to look like it originally did, but they're wanting to reuse it for programming and for their own headquarters for Historic Albany Foundation. So it's an exciting project. It's being done in phases. And, the Preservation League support that they've enjoyed for this project has helped them leverage money from even greater grants. So in 2021, just a year after their historic structure report, they received $500,000 through the REDC to embark on phase 2 of their exterior restoration of this building. So I urge you to learn more about this project. The more I read about it, the more I wanted to talk about it, but I also don't want to keep everybody all evening, and I want to have time for questions. So if you're interested in learning more about the Van Ooststrand Radliff House and their journey with it, they're having a program on Friday, February 18th from 9 to 11 a.m. If you go to their website at historic-albany.org, you can sign up for this free program. And what it is it's an international cultural and architectural exchange. They're going to be talking with folks from the Netherlands about the role of heritage and area development in the Netherlands and in the United States. And they're going to be focusing on the Van Ooststrand Radliff House in Albany and the Kinderdorp Children's Village in the Netherlands. So it should be a really interesting program. And, I hope you all look into that because this project's fascinating. And they've come a long way with it. And these big grants are really helping things along. So the second example that I have of an REDC success story is from the Seward House Museum. Now, the Seward House Museum received a PNY grant from us in 2015 for a cultural landscape report. So the Seward House consists of the house and barn and carriage house. And so their desire is to reuse the barn and carriage house for programming. And in order to do that, they needed to do a few studies first. The cultural landscape reports helps them to understand how the landscape around the Seward House can be interpreted to the public and restored, to its historic accuracy. 2 years later, they came back for another Preserve New York grant, this time for a building condition report. And then in 2020, they received a TAG grant for $4,000 for a feasibility reuse study. And that looked specifically at the barn and carriage house and how they could potentially reuse it. So that study was instrumental in leveraging $500,000 through the REDC in 2021 to restore the barn and carriage house for their use. So I love this. I love all these stories, but it's really fun to see how Preservation League grants can really help make the case for larger grants on down the road. These preservation planning studies show that you have professional input on the reuse of your building and on what it needs in order to be rehabilitated properly, preserving its historic integrity and serving its highest and best use. So the Seward House Museum will save these two structures on its campus by converting them into usable space for the public. After performing intensive preservation work, the barn will serve as a multi-purpose space for year-round use, and the carriage house will become an accessible exhibit space for the Seward carriage. I think we should all go on a field trip and see that. So, so this is the second of my examples. And finally, the Hudson Athens Lighthouse Preservation Society is preserving the Hudson Athens Lighthouse out in the middle of the Hudson River. This historic lighthouse needs quite a bit of work, and they are well underway with that. In 2020, we listed the Hudson Athens Lighthouse on our 7 to Save list. So it was nominated, it was chosen by our review panel, and for the next 2 years, we highlighted the Hudson Athens Lighthouse through a series of blog posts and social media, shining a light on the plight to save this building. In 2020, we also awarded the Hudson Athens Lighthouse Preservation Society a technical assistance grant for structural analysis. That structural analysis was a little bit unusual because it's a lighthouse and the structure is partially underwater, but we funded it. And then they came back the next year for a building condition report. So you can imagine, so as a TAG grant is for a discrete project. So that was just looking at an aspect of its structure to make sure that it was sound and able to be saved. And then finally, the building condition report was a more comprehensive look at the structure and the building on top of it to see what needs to happen for its restoration. So all this led to an REDC grant of $500,000 to restore and repair the Hudson Athens Lighthouse. So following the guidance of the structural analysis and the building condition report. So we couldn't be more proud to be part of this project, and so happy to see this project moving forward with the help of an EPF grant. Are there any questions about any of these projects, about how they underwent these things? I promised to talk a little bit about fundraising, actually, and the Historic Albany Foundation, in addition to these grants, see, I'm making it sound really easy. You know, you get a Preservation League grant, then you get a $500,000 in EPF grant. It's not really that easy. And Historic Albany Foundation, for all its resources here that have come in through these grants, have also undertaken a couple of pretty intensive fundraising projects for 48 Hudson. So please keep in mind that as wonderful as these grants are, they don't even come close to covering the entire cost of their projects. There's a lot of fundraising that has to occur as well. So again, I urge you to learn more about 48 Hudson and about the Hudson Athens Lighthouse, because fundraising is a big part of those projects, and you can kind of see how they went about raising the money that they did. All right, so those are only 3 of the examples of the 15 projects that we've been involved in that received significant EPF grants this year. If you'd like to learn about the rest of them, we have a blog post about all of them and how $1 in Preservation League funding can lead to $13 in state funding. That was the average. So please check out our website. Again, you'll get this slide. You can click on the link in the slide and be able to go in and read about all 15 projects on our website. So, are you ready to apply for a Preserve New York grant? I hope so. The very first step is to read the grant guidelines. They're on our website. They will also be attached to the follow-up email that you'll receive from me after tonight's presentation. Read them carefully. They go over the 4 project types. They also go over the evaluation criteria that we use to choose who gets funding. So you want to read that carefully. When you're ready, fill out the pre-application. It's on our website. It's a short form. The pre-application is intended to determine eligibility of the applicant, eligibility of the building, and eligibility of the project. Once all those three things check out, I send you the link to the full application and you can get started. The application deadline is August 15th. It's a Friday at 5 p.m. So you can plan accordingly. In the meantime, as soon as you fill out that pre-application and get the application link back from me, you will also receive our consultant list. You may already have a consultant in mind for your project, but if you don't worry. We have a list of consultants that have successfully completed Preservation League plan funded projects in the past. We will give that to you and you can start making phone calls. It's important to contact your consultant early because these folks get slammed when it's time for Preservation League grants. So give them a call early, talk to them about your project, get them to come out and visit your site and give you a scope of work and agree to be part of your project. And then you can complete your application with the help that they provide through their consultation. Another thing you can do ahead of time is start taking pictures of your building. Our applications do require photos to be uploaded, so make sure that you take at least 10 pictures of your building. Step back and get a big overall view. If it's a cultural resource survey, get nice street views showing some representative buildings in your area. If it's a single building, get a good overall view of the building and then start to narrow in on areas of concern for that building, areas that you want to address with your building condition report or your historic structure report, etc. So take lots of pictures, preview the application. Once I send you the application link, you can actually preview it before you begin filling it out. So you can hit the preview button, you can scroll through and see what it all entails and start planning for all the things you'll need to apply. You can also print it out and show it to your board if you want to. One thing that we do ask is that you please do not share your application link with anyone because the pre-application process is absolutely essential to being able to submit an application. So we've got to have that pre-application before we send the application link. So please don't share it with anybody. Follow the application instructions. They are right in the application itself. In years past, we have distributed application instructions on a sheet of paper. We don't do that anymore. They're right in the application. It's all online now, and it's easier than ever to apply. So you should find it fairly simple, I hope. Make sure you submit it on time and don't be afraid to ask questions. And speaking of questions, looks like we have one. Janet, do I need to have the Gardner Foundation visit my site prior to applying? You don't. You don't, although you can invite them if you want. I am going to make every effort to reach every applicant's site this year. We haven't done any kind of site visits since COVID started. I'm really anxious to get back out in the field and visit everyone, but I'm not going to schedule these site visits till we get all of the applications submitted. So after April 15th, I'll be scheduling, hopefully, site visits for everyone. That includes sites on Long Island. If the Gardner Foundation would like to come along on the site visit, I certainly would welcome them along and I'll let them know of my plans. But no, it's not a requirement, but it always helps to have your funders be familiar with your site ahead of time if you can. So wouldn't hurt. So thank you for asking. All right. So I wanted to show you this. When I send you your application link, you'll click on it and it will take you to a page that shows a description of the project. And actually that's the next, it'll take you to this page. Okay, so you get to read the description of the Preserve New York grant program, the requirements, the eligibility, all that. And when you're satisfied with that, at the bottom of the screen, you can see a little blue link that says preview. You can click on that and you can preview the whole application before you even begin to apply. And then maybe you'll decide not to apply, but probably not. You'll be able to preview it. And then when you're ready, hit that green apply button at the bottom of your screen. When you hit that for the first time, it'll take you to this page. Now, unfortunately, it asks you to sign into your account. If you've never signed in to Smarter Select before, you can't sign in. So in my little squiggly green lines, I've circled what you need to click on, which is create a new account. So make sure you click on that. Create your account first, and then you can sign in and start your application. This is a point of confusion for a lot of people, and I really apologize. It's the way the software works. I promise you this is the most problematic part of the entire thing. Everything else is really easy and smooth, but this, make sure you create your account first, otherwise you won't be able to sign in. Okay? All right. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Any other questions? Nope. Let's go ahead and move on. You're welcome. All right. So that's what to expect with the online application when you first go into the portal. All right, so you might be wondering how we evaluate our grant applications. Well, we can convene a grant review panel comprised of expert preservationists from around the state. So these are museum people, they're architects, they're engineers. There are others who have received our grants in the past, historic site administrators, all kinds of people who know all about this stuff. And they will grade each application on its own merits. So we don't so much compare one application with another. We look at your application and we grade it on these three criteria. All right, so these three criteria are historic preservation, excellence, and budget quality, fiscal and managerial competence of the applicant, and finally, service to the public. These three criteria are discussed at length in the grant guidelines. So make sure you read the grant guidelines and understand these criteria. When you write your summary letter, you'll want to address these criteria in that summary letter so that we are convinced that you meet all these criteria. So make sure that you pay special attention to that. These are graded, each item is graded on a scale of 0 to 5. And then the 3 scores for each of the 3 criteria are averaged, and that creates a score for your application. So we go through, I say we, I don't score anything. I have no voting privileges here. So I'm just here to help our review panel understand all the projects and to answer their questions. These are scored by our review panel. And then finally, the results are tallied. We have a certain amount of money that we have to give away, and we have a certain number of applicants. We go down that list and see how everyone scored, and we award the top scoring ones until we reach the line where we run out of money, and that's where we cut it off. So it's really pretty simple sounding. There's always that heartbreaking moment when somebody falls below the line. I mean, we get so many good applications every year. To give you an idea of how competitive Preserve New York grants are, we, for the last 2 years, we granted 50% of the applications we received. So that's not too bad, but please keep in mind, these are competitive grants, and you know, I wish you all lots of luck in applying. We can't fund them all, but we sure try. So let's see if we have any questions. If you sign in with Google first instead of creating an account, is that a problem? No, it's okay if you're signed into Google. You're fine. It's a totally separate account and it's not going to matter. You'll be okay. Let me go back to that screen though. I can kind of see why you asked that. Let's see. Oh, I see what you're saying. Sign in with Google. You know, I've never tried that, and I don't know if anybody has. You can try it. I wouldn't recommend doing that though. I would go to the create new account instead, just to be on the safe side. If you try signing in with Google and it doesn't work, if you don't know how to proceed from there, you can always contact me and I'll help you. I've never tried to hit that red button to sign in with Google. Maybe I'll give that a shot and I'd be able to answer your question a little bit better. So you can try either way and see what happens. But I would recommend creating the new account first. I know that works. So thank you for your question. I'm sorry for the convoluted answer. All right, so when it comes time to apply, there's some tips and tricks that you could use. There are no real tricks to it, to be honest, just some things to keep in mind. So make sure you read all the directions and forms ahead of time. Mentally prepare yourself for applying. Our application is really pretty simple and straightforward. In fact, every year we look for ways to make our application simpler and easier to use. We're not trying to trip anybody up. We're just trying to get the information we need to make a good decision. So read the application itself. Remember how to preview it by clicking the little preview button once you get into Smarter Select. Then make sure you read your grant guidelines. Do that first. Do that before you even pre-apply. But keep the grant guidelines handy to refer to. They will help you along the way. And the instructions will pop up along the way in the application itself. So as you scroll through the application in Smarter Select, little help bubbles will pop up to explain each question, not for every question, but for the ones that require further explanation to help you understand what we're looking for in a thorough and appropriate answer. So those application instructions should help you along. All right, so I have another question. Would grant funding be available to move a building from one location to another? Awesome question. A couple years ago, we did fund the Peter Crippen House on Long Island in preparation for its being moved. Now, we funded an engineering structural analysis for the Peter Crippen House because they want to move it. We did not fund the move itself. We don't provide that kind of funding. So unfortunately, we can't provide the capital funding that you need to actually move the building. We can fund a structural analysis or a similar analysis to see if the building can withstand the move, to see if there are any shoring up or structural things that need to happen with the building before it's moved. So that kind of analysis is a good idea, I think, no matter what, before you move a building. So that's the kind of funding that we provide for a building move. I hope that helps answer your question, June. All right, and would funding be available for consultant services outside of reports or analyses? For example, funding to support work for credit, For example, funding to support work for legal services from a tax credit attorney. No, unfortunately, our funding doesn't allow for that. So no, I apologize. We do get that question from time to time, but it's only for preservation planning studies. The ones that I mentioned are the only ones that we can fund. So thank you for your question, Drew. All right, so as part of your application, you're going to need two budgets. You're going to need your organizational budget, and that is just a one-page summary of income and expenses for your organization. If you're a municipality applying for Preserve New York, please don't provide your entire municipal budget. We don't want any 60-page budgets. We only want a one-page summary of the department that's going to be handling this grant-funded project. So if it's your planning department or parks department, we just want a one-page summary of their income and expenses, not for the entire municipality. Make sure that in your organizational budget, you account for that 20% cash match so we can see where that's coming from. Make sure that you include that in there. The second budget we need is a project budget, and this is for the Preserve New York funded project that we're talking about. So this is the amount of money that you're going to need to pay the consultant to do the report or survey. So our Preserve New York grants only fund that consultant fee. We don't fund anything above and beyond that. So a good portion, actually all of your project budget, will be coming from your consultant. So it's important that they give you a clear breakdown of the tasks, deliverables, and totals. We don't want to see a lump sum. We will do a building condition survey for $10,000. No, we don't want to see that. We want to see what goes into it. We want to see their time. We want to see their expenses. We want to see all the staff members at the consulting firm that will be working on the project, that sort of thing. So make sure that your project budget is adequately detailed. Make sure that you do not include any capital expenses for on down the road. So we know that your Preserve New York grant is just the start of your big capital project, and you're excited and you know that it's going to be expensive. We don't want that part of the budget to be part of this grant application. So you don't have to worry about coming up with those numbers just yet. Make sure that you take your photographs of your building. Make sure they're nice and clear, high resolution. We need 10 images for your application. So make sure you take 10, submit 10. Please remember that the grant review panel, and I probably haven't seen your historic site ahead of time. Hopefully I will make it to all of our applicant sites this spring. It remains to be seen. But at any rate, the review panel needs to be able to get an idea of your project and your site from the photos that you submit. So make sure they're good ones. And you can always ask questions anytime. This is my phone number. Feel free to call me anytime, ask your questions. You can also email grants@preservenys.org. That email reaches both me and Katie Como, our Vice President for Preservation and Policy. So you will have our attention and we can answer your questions that way as well. You can also email me directly. My email address is here. The grant deadline, Friday, April 15th at 5 p.m. So make sure that you get everything underway soon to apply. We have a few minutes left for questions. Are there any other questions before we close things out? I don't see any questions, so hopefully I've answered your questions. Some folks ask us about other funding sources, especially for capital projects. Here are some funding sources that we are aware of that we can help direct you to. Again, you don't have to write them all down. I'll send this all to you. Probably Friday is when I'll send out this email in order to get everything together for you. So there are some grants out there just waiting for you to apply. The Environmental Protection Fund grants, the REDC grants that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, generally roll around in about May with a deadline in July. So if you're thinking about applying for one of those, it's never too early to start preparing for that. If you have questions about that, you can always ask me as well. Religious organizations do have some options out there, even though we don't grant them. There are organizations that do. So New York Landmarks Conservancy has their Sacred Sites program. It's excellent. And Partners for Sacred Spaces mostly offers technical services to religious organizations, congregations for their buildings. These are valuable resources, and I urge you to share them with your friends if they ask. And please keep in touch with us at the Preservation League of New York State. We have very active social media and a lot of compelling stories there. So please follow us on social media. Check out our YouTube page because all of our webinars, including this one, are up on our YouTube page. And this one will be up in the next couple of days in case you want to share it with anybody or revisit it. And finally, if you enjoyed today's presentation and if you like the work that the Preservation League of New York State does, please consider becoming a member. We need your support in order to do the work that we do, and we appreciate every bit of it. Coming up, I do have no more webinars for this series, but this one will be on YouTube. If you have questions as you're filling out your application, you can either call or email, or you can sign up for one of my drop-in help sessions. There will be Mondays and Thursdays throughout February until the deadline in April. So those are a nice opportunity to learn from other applicants and to get your questions answered in real time. All right. So if there are no more questions, I'll let you go eat your dinner. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. Good luck to everyone, and I look forward to seeing your applications. All right, good night.